الله بالخير. غزة تنزف والعالم يشيح بوجهه. العواصم الغربية تتحدث عن القانون لكنها تمول النار. اتفاق وقف إطلاق النار حبر على ورق، أما في الواقع وعلى الأرض فمجزرة ومحرقة وإبادة. بيوت تمحى، عوائل تلاحق، أطفال يدفنون تحت الركام والطين وتحت جنح الصمت. إسرائيل تحول غزة إلى أرض قاحلة والغرب يسمي ذلك دفاعا عن النفس. هذه ليست سياسة بل شراكة في الإبادة، هي إبادة شعب وأرض وحضارة وتاريخ. نسأل إلى متى تواصل الحكومات الغربية تمثيل الحياد وهي تمول الموت، موت الإنسانية بالجملة، حين يتحول ما يسمى اتفاق وقف إطلاق النار إلى موسم قتل؟ من يحاسب على هذا التضليل والتدليس والكذب والإجرام؟ وإذا كانت إسرائيل تعلن عزمها التطهير العرقي بلا خجل وبلا هوادة، فبأي منطق ما زال العالم يصفها بالديمقراطية؟ ومن ينسق الحملة لتجميل مشروع التطهير العرقي الصهيوني؟ ما الهدف الجيوسياسي النهائي من تحويل غزة إلى مساحة محروقة؟ عقاب جماعي أم أرض تسلب وترسم خريطة جديدة للمنطقة؟ نرحب بكم ونرى ونسمع أكثر مع كريس هيدجز، المراسل الحربي الحائز جائزة بوليتزر والمؤلف الأكثر مبيعاً في البعد الأقرب. هذه الميادين، وأنا زينب صفار، خليكم ويانا. Salam and welcome to Al Mayadeen. This is Zainab Al Safa for the proximate aspect, and my dear guest is Chris Hedges, Pulitzer Prize-winning war correspondent and best-selling author, joining us from Princeton, New Jersey. Chris, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. Well, Chris, I'd like to start with the big picture. You openly use terms like genocide and apartheid to describe Israel's policies and practices. During your years at the New York Times, did you feel pressure to self-censor these words to keep your job? What ultimately pushed you to use the word genocide, and where do you draw that line?
Well, words like genocide, apartheid, those are words that still don't appear in the New York Times. And the New York Times is a heavily edited newspaper. So my job was primarily filing stories. I was in the Middle East for 7 years off the ground. So that meant that I spent significant amounts of time in Gaza, lived in Gaza for weeks at a time. And I would report on daily strikes, airstrikes, clashes. This was back when the settlers still were in Gaza, and these were news stories. But you're right that the kinds of words, like, you could never use the word apartheid. I left the New York Times over my opposition to the invasion of Iraq. I denounced that for the debacle that all of us who came out of the Arab world knew it would be, and that ended my job at the New York Times. I was very conscious of what I was doing, but at the same time, I had friends in Iraq who I knew would suffer tremendously, some of whom we lost, and I felt a kind of moral obligation to speak out. I certainly understood that Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction because I had covered the UN inspection teams that had destroyed the stockpiles. He did have chemical agents in artillery shells. Those were destroyed. So that ended my time with the New York Times. I've since published 16 books. My last book is on the genocide. It's called Genocide Foretold. And that gets into the use of the word genocide. So I think any of us who covered the settler colonial project in Israel understood very well that from the beginnings of the Zionist project, the goal was to cleanse, in their words, ethnically cleanse, displace
Exterminate the
Palestinians.
Palestinians. True.
Of course,
Right.
yes. And so when this genocide began, I mean the Israeli officials were quite open rhetorically about what they wanted to do. They they called them human animals, and there would be no water. I mean, this was from the inception. So I used the word very early on, but I think that I was able to use it because I understood the DNA of the Zionist project. That in the biggest periods of ethnic cleansing always occurred during war, 1948 with the Nakba, and then 1967 you had 350,000 Palestinians displaced. But in between these wars, there was that slow motion ethnic cleansing, the seizure not just of land, but seizure of resources, aquifers, everything else.
True.
And of course, October 7th gave them in their eyes, the green light to turbocharge this genocide in Gaza. So I don't really think that for serious scholars of genocide or serious observers of the conflict in Gaza, there's much dispute anymore about the term genocide. But you're right, it was a very controversial word to use just a few weeks into the genocide.
You've written that Zionist institutions and their imperial backers understand their project rests on feet of clay, which is why they suppress any movement or individual or idea supporting Palestinian liberation. You refer to Hamas as a resistance movement, not terrorist, as many term in the West. What does resistance actually mean, Chris, in this context? And why do oppressed populations resist in the first place?
Well, let's be clear.
If I may.
Yeah, oppressed populations under international law have every right to resist, including the use of force. I was in Gaza for the founding of Hamas. I knew Dr. Abdelaziz Rantisi quite well. Hamas was always described to me by him and other Hamas leaders as a national liberation movement, one, of course, with Islamic coloring, but still a national liberation movement. That's what it is. Of course, any national liberation movement is demonized by the oppressor and the oppressor's supporters as terrorists. That's not particularly new. That goes back to, I covered the wars in El Salvador. The FMLN guerrillas were demonized in the same manner. The ANC in South Africa was considered a terrorist organization. The current president of Syria used to have a $10 million bounty placed on his head. So in opposition, that's classic. That's a classic way to dismiss the legitimate aspirations of any resistance movement, and that of Hamas is no exception to that.
Right. Now, across the United States, students are rejecting Zionism in numbers not seen before. Do you see this as a genuine generational rupture with the American empire, or a wave of campus radicalism that may dissolve after graduation? Why is the language of resistance, Chris, resonating so powerfully with young Americans today?
Well, because this has been a live streamed genocide. So Israel's mask, Israel's facade has dropped. We've seen the Zionist state for what it is. And large numbers of, well, not just students, but Jewish students. I was in the encampments in Columbia, Princeton. 20 or 30% of these students were Jewish. So it's just become so repugnant to support the genocide, and not just the genocide, but the lies that come with it. I mean, Israel lies like it breathes. So yes, I think it is a seismic moment in that I don't think there's any coming back for Israel. I mean, it can, at least in terms of resurrecting the image that it had before as a liberal democracy and this kind of stuff within the Middle East. I don't think that's coming back. And that includes, of course, young Jews. I mean, who were always, I speak at many universities, and always meet with the Students for Justice in Palestine chapters. And they always have, even before the genocide, a significant percentage of
And
Jewish
yet,
students.
Chris, the White House has labeled Palestine solidarity as pro-jihadist, even threatening deportations. Is this the early emergence of an American form of fascism?
Well, it's not even that early. Yes, it's the emergence of a form of fascism. So you saw three phases. One, these students who really acted as the nation's conscience. These were shut down after the spring semester of 2024. University heads met with security firms, many linked to Israel, and they turned universities into essentially closed spaces, shut down free speech. Of course, we saw police brought into the campus. Over 100 students at Columbia were arrested. I think a total of 3,000 students were arrested. Some were beaten, many expelled, suspended. The few professors who stood up in support of these students often lost their jobs, like Catherine Franke at the law school in Columbia, etc. And that was phase one. Phase two was the demonization of immigrants, which allowed the creation of our own version of the brown shirts, these goons, ICE. And the third was after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who was homophobic, Islamophobic, misogynist, racist.
But he said about
But
Israel that Israel is committing a genocide.
now he never said that. He was moving away. Man, he was created by the Zionist backers. I mean, he was really funded. He had an $80 million a year budget. Much of that was Zionist money. His base drifted away from that narrative. He recognized that. And so he gave voice to critics, but he never
But
quite went that
sometimes,
far.
Chris, don't you think that when you change horses or you change your cloak, you get assassinated?
I don't know that. I mean, we don't know the motive for the assassination, and I don't want to go there. But that he had a rupture with his Zionist backers is clear. Max Blumenthal, the Gray Zone, has reported this. Yes, and that just, we know from the polling numbers that across the board, whether right wing, left wing, whatever, among that kind of younger demographic, they have really severed their ties with Israel. And he was responding to his base.
True.
And he gave voice to harsh critics of Israel, and that created pressure on him. But he never went so far as to call it a genocide.
Right. Now, let's dig into Western complicity in the Gaza war. What is the real extent of Western involvement in prolonging Israel's assault, whether through weapons, political protection, or the laundering of impunity under the banner of international law?
Well, it's a clear violation of international law. I mean, that's part of what's so frightening. There's been an utter disregard for international law. By the perpetuation of the genocide would not continue, and it is continuing. It's just the pace is slowed, but it's still continuing, of course. And the genocide would have stopped months ago, especially the United States, which provides two-thirds of its weapon shipments and stockpiles. I mean, Israel ran out of its stockpiles a long time ago. So the United States in particular, but along with Germany and the UK, have sustained the genocide, not only by funneling weapons. I think the U.S. has given $22 billion to Israel since the genocide began, and we already give them $3.8 billion a year in military aid. So none of that would have happened. The UK has run, I think, 600 surveillance flights on behalf of Israel over Gaza, etc. So there's complete complicity, but then also there's the blocking of UN resolutions or any attempt by the international community to hold Israel accountable, coupled with what we mentioned before, the criminalizing of any dissent. You have Palestine Action. These are nonviolent protesters who are seeking to halt the shipments. I mean, Elbit produces weapons, the Israeli arms firm in the UK. They're in prison on hunger strike. So,
Right.
And Germany's even worse.
Chris, at a deeper level, who are the global power brokers benefiting from Gaza's devastation? Which hidden networks sustain this economy of genocide, such an appalling term? And who is coordinating the global misinformation machines that sanitize a project of displacement, ethnic cleansing, as you said, and extermination across governments and media institutions?
Well, I mean, so Israel is rapidly attempting to cement into place its long vision of quote unquote greater Israel. What does that mean? It's not just the seizure of land. Of course, they now control half of Gaza. They have their vision of totally displacing Gazans from their land is not over. I mean, it's still continuing. They in southern Lebanon, they've moved into Syria, and but not only that, they've carried out a series of bombing strikes. I mean, they've been attacking UN peacekeepers in southern Lebanon, carried out bombing strikes in Tehran, in Qatar, of course, in Syria, and what it is an attempt to create not just through the seizure of land, but also through military dominance greater Israel, the hegemony of Israel. And we saw, of course, the decapitation of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And that serves the interests of an imperial power like the United States. That's number one. Number two, there's billions of dollars to be made from genocide. Francesca Albanese's report before this one, where she calls out the 62 states that are complicit in supporting the genocide, is about all of these corporations that profit from the genocide. Everybody from Caterpillar to Peter Thiel and AI and all that kind of stuff. So those two factors, Israel becomes a proxy by creating hegemony, Israeli hegemony throughout the region that serves the interests of U.S. imperialism. And number two, there's a lot of money to be made in the mass slaughter of Palestinians.
Sure. Now, let's talk Latin America. Is Washington preparing to recycle the Iraq playbook in Venezuela, Chris, deploying elite units with histories linked to death squads under the familiar pretext of restoring democracy? And who in Washington stands to gain from a new collapse in Latin America?
Well, the case of Venezuela, of course, it has a lot to do with oil. I don't see that the United States is preparing to actually invade Venezuela, but what we could see are airstrikes. The same kind of aerial dominance that Israel has used in the Middle East. That could very well be what comes next. The other problem, though, in reading this is that Donald Trump is very impulsive. He kind of changes his mind by the minute, so he's unfocused, and he lose. I don't think he's paying much attention to Gaza. I mean, he doesn't care particularly. He had his moment in the sun in Egypt, in Sharm el Sheikh. I think that's where everybody met. So. But it's all his attention span is very, very, very short, which makes his policy very difficult to predict.
Yes, but after decades of shattered countries and peoples from Afghanistan, Chris, and Iraq to Libya to Syria to Yemen to Haiti, what mechanism, if any, can restrain a U.S. foreign policy that treats entire nations as expendable test sites for geopolitical experiments and gains?
Well, the United States is doing a pretty good job of destroying itself. Remember the 20 years of warfare in the Middle East, which, of course, engendered tremendous suffering and destruction for Iraqis, Afghans, Syrians, Libyans, and others, nevertheless, was an indication of the decline of empire. These were wars that, by any definition, the United States lost. So this military adventurism is always characteristic of late empires who seek to regain a declining hegemony or dominance through military fiascos that blow up in their face, as Ukraine is doing. Ukraine, of course, is a proxy war for the United States. So the problem, of course, is that even though the United States is an empire in decline, its military prowess and power is quite terrifying and quite large. Right. And it will use it. But that the empire is in decline is unmistakable. What can we do? Well, I'm flying in this week to Italy to join the unions that are shutting down the ports in Genoa and the march in Rome. We have to get to the streets to halt the genocide, but also, more importantly, to hold our governments to account, to make them respect the rule of law, because otherwise we are entering a very frightening era in human history where these wealthy nations indiscriminately use industrial violence with absolutely no check, no regard for legality itself. And that's what I fear is really, potentially what the genocide in Gaza will engender.
Right. A final question, Chris. You are a Pulitzer Prize-winning war correspondent who has spent years on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank, in the region, actually. What is your requiem for Gaza and your call to action for the world, for those who still refuse to look away?
Well, we can't trust the institutions of power to do the right thing. We have to create pressure, and that's why I'm flying to Italy. And the most pressure we can create is the strike, to cripple business, to cripple commerce, to cripple the machinery of government. And it's really incumbent upon us, because if genocide becomes normalized, especially as the climate breaks down with mass migrations, etc., that kind of mass murder, that kind of control will come to characterize the world ahead, and we can't let that happen. The fight for Palestine, really, in that sense, is the fight for all of us.
So does this point to collective punishment alone, what is happening in Gaza, or the early stages of a redesigned regional map, especially in the wake of the most recent Trump's so-called peace plan?
Well, no, Israel clearly, Netanyahu goes to the UN and holds up the map, so there's not much mystery as to what they want. The problem is they have yet to find a place where they can, of course, now they're just slaughtering. And let's be clear, the numbers of dead are far higher than the very conservative counts that are given us by the Hamas authorities in Gaza. They record those people who come into morgues or hospitals, few of which exist. And just anecdotally, having many friends in Gaza, half of whom have just disappeared. They're no doubt buried under the rubble. So, we don't know. I would guess the numbers of dead are in the hundreds of thousands. So it's extermination. Of course, there's no clean water. The siege continues until Israel is able to figure and has these now plane flying people to South Africa from Gaza. But clearly the goal is not changed, and that is to empty Gaza. Until then, Gaza will just be this horrible kind of concentration camp where people are clinging to life.
Right. Chris Heytjes, award-winning war correspondent, writer and journalist. It was an honor to have you with us, Chris, today. We look forward to welcome you again sometime in the future. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
لعل الحقيقة بسيطة جدا، الربح هو القوة، الحرب تغذي أسواق المال، يتاجر بالمعاناة البشرية في مقابل المليارات، الجامعات تبتكر أدوات القمع، الشركات ومصانع الأسلحة تدير آلة الإبادة الجماعية، القوانين واضحة لكن الصمت يهيمن على أصحاب القرار. الإبادة لا تعيش من دون صمت، الحصار يشتد، أعداد الشهداء تتصاعد، وكل رصاصة تشحن تربطكم بالجريمة. إن سقطت أرضنا فسيتمدد النموذج، الحدود تتصلب، الجدران ترتفع، الرقابة تتوحش، والحقوق تتبخر. اليوم ما يعيشه الفلسطينيون في غزة والضفة واللبنانيون في الجنوب والبقاع قد يعيشه العالم غدا. المقاومة ليست منا، هي كرامة، هي وطن، هي دفاع عن الإنسانية والأرض والأصالة والشرف. معركة فلسطين هي معركة الإنسان، هي معركة الكل. إن صمتنا الآن فلن يبقى أحد خارج الدمار، فحين تصبح الإبادة هدفا وسياسة رسمية بأي وجه سنبرر أننا وقفنا نتفرج؟ وإذا باتت الأرباح تبرر الإبادة فأي مستقبل نتوقع للبشرية؟ من كل الميادين حياكم.